Welcome. My name is John Parks. I'm from the Colorado Energy Office, and I want to welcome you today to the 2024 update to Colorado's grid resilience funding allocation. This is from the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, Section 40101D. This is, I believe, the fourth such webinar we've given on this topic. And so you'll see some similarities if you've attended some of the previous webinars. And this meeting is being recorded. So if you, this is a webinar, so if you prefer to not have your face seen or your comments expressed in this recorded webinar, you can stay off camera and not submit comments, although we will have a comment period at the end. And so we do encourage folks to participate in that. We also have on board Julia Masters, who is the program manager for the Microgrids for Community Resilience. And let's go ahead and I'll show you the agenda here. So first, we're going to talk about the funding opportunity that we have open for the fall of 2024. It just opened yesterday, and it will go through November 1st, November 15th, and December 1st, depending on the program. We've got 3 different grant programs here. We will talk about some of the funding to date, and then we'll talk about each of the different grant programs. Julia will talk about the MCR program. I'll talk about grid hardening and advanced grid monitoring, and as well as the microgrid roadmap. These are grants, so we're not talking about Hugh Grant here, but ways to get some money for your utility, municipality, or organization. We'll also have some time for other funding and engagement opportunities and Q&A. So here's our funding thus far. So this is again, this funding comes from the infrastructure bill, known as the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, BIL, or IIJA from 2021. There are 5 years of funding. And so last year in 2023, we received the first 2 years of funding. And so that totaled about $17 million. And just last month, we received the 3rd year of funding, which is about $8.4 million. So here's how we split up the funding between the different programs. So you see on the left side there is the MCR program. We did prioritize the microgrids as a solution for increasing grid resiliency during the first round. And so they actually, Julia and Dola, who that program is through, actually split up their funding into 2 separate funding cycles. And so you have the year 1 funding in purple, and then the year 2 funding in red. And so that year 1 funding, that was last fall of 2023, and then that year 2 funding, that was this past spring. And you can also see on there the amount that was requested. So that was the total amount of grants requests that was sent into to all 3 of our programs. And then you see the proposed awards to the Department of Energy. And you see the total number of sub-awards proposed to DOE, 11 for MCRs, 7 for the grid hardening, and then 6 for the advanced grid monitoring. And so here is a timeline to just give you an understanding moving forward of what this will look like. One thing that we have realized over this process, going through this process from last year, is that if you look at the bottom row there, the DOE review is taking much longer than we expected. So we had a lot of programs from last year that used their well, they had planned on starting their projects on on January 1st or on April 1st, 2024, and we are now just finishing up the grant review process and from DOE and moving on to the contracting phase. So here, if you look at this, we just opened all three of these grants yesterday on August 27th, and that now I'm sorry if there's some background noise there. Hold on a second.
I can take over for you, John, if you want.
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, so we have staggered our application windows to hopefully be a little bit easier for you utilities and other entities to get your applications in if you are thinking about applying for more than one of these programs. So the MCR window, as we can talk about, is going to end in early December. The grid hardening, as you can see, is going to end in November, as well as advanced grid monitoring. So we'll have a bit of a staggered approach. And just kind of reiterating this DOE review timeline, 2 to 6 months is the estimate. That is also pending, any NEPA flags or any sort of the Buy America waiver. There are a lot of things out of our control with that type of review process. So we are trying to set expectations that this is a long tail of the review process, and just trying to be as transparent as possible with when we will actually be able to go under contract for these projects.
Thank you, Julia. Yeah, so when thinking about your budgetary planning and your project planning for any of the projects that might be funded by this, please think about a start date no earlier than Q3 of 2025, and probably it might be further towards Q4 2025. Here's our year 3 of funding. We took information from the that first round of funding, and we saw that there was the highest interest in the grid hardening for small and rural communities. So we kept the amount of funding for that and the advanced grid monitoring programs static from the first round to this round of funding. So it's about 4.1 million and 1.8 million in those two projects respectively. In the MCR, there is $2 million available. There's also some residual funding left over from the last round that's, I believe, smaller than that, but Julia will be speaking to that in a moment. So I will go ahead and pass it back to Julia to talk about the MCR program.
Great. Thank you. Next slide. Awesome. So folks have probably seen this slide. This is just an overview of what a microgrid is. Thinking about a group of interconnected loads and DERs that can be either connected or disconnected from the grid, enabling island mode or grid connected mode. And for this program, we have two types of grants: planning grants and implementation grants. And yeah, we can go to the next slide. Again, this will probably look familiar, but just as some background, the map on the left shows where we have awarded both planning and construction grants in our first 2 rounds of funding. We have closed our round 3 of funding for MCR, and those projects are currently in review and being passed along to DOE. So those are not reflected on this map. But really what this grant program is looking at is thinking about resilience, not just from a strictly grid infrastructure perspective, but broader than that. And so here on the right, we have 3 examples of projects we funded that show a communications focused resilience, an economic, and then a strictly grid resilience. So just kind of different ways to conceptualize what types of projects might be competitive for this grant program. Next slide, please. In round 2, we awarded 4 construction grants and 1 planning grant, and you know, kind of the same spread here of some grid-related focus, some communications, and we just giving an outline here of different projects that have made it through our selection committee to show the wide range of projects. So some being small microgrids designed to, you know, support one room in a building for a community resilience hub. Others, like in this Platte River example, leasing an entire 5 megawatt battery on a feeder line that will serve a whole slew of critical facilities. And, you know, another like United Power looking at installing batteries at 4 separate fire stations to ensure resilience. And finally, you know, the city of Springfield is doing their own planning grant at the moment. We're really encouraging utilities that are interested in a service-wide territory assessment for potential microgrid options to pursue this. We are, you know, we recognize that different utilities are at different stages of their own analysis. And so you don't necessarily have to have one location in mind if you are interested in kind of doing a wider analysis of various areas in your service territory. That would also be highly encouraged. Next slide, please. So here's what we have available that just launched yesterday. So unlike, unlike previous rounds, we are no longer offering construction for generation assets. So previously we had 3 funding streams, and one of them could go towards, you know, new generation. That has been totally expended in the last round. So we have these 2 available funding streams. For the planning grants, we have upped that max award to $75,000, just to incorporate potentially larger exploratory projects. That source of funding is only available to co-ops and munis. There's a 1/3 match, and for that timeline, it's actually going to be rolling. So at any point in the next 1.5 years, you can submit that application, and we will have iterative selection committee review of that to ensure that these funds can get spent and these planning projects can get off the ground. And then for the construction, storage, and controller, there's about $4.2 million. That's both leftover from the 3rd round of funding and then infused with this additional year of DOE funding. This is the pot of money that can go both to utilities and to local governments or anchor institutions, and it's a $2.5 million grant request max, and with some, you know, various match details. So just keeping in mind, we're only having 2 funding streams this round. There is no funding for new generation available under this grant program. Next slide, please. And just a quick overview of a resilience or a community anchor institution. We're thinking of these as, you know, forward-facing assets that serve the public. So schools and libraries, emergency medical service providers, resilience hubs, and we have a whole slew of ways that that can be defined that is in the legislation. So if you are one of those types of entities and you're interested in applying, let's touch base to make sure that you fit this definition. All right, next slide. And just some example projects. I've kind of talked through this, but the planning grants can be both site-specific or service-wide, territory-specific. And then for the construction implementation, these projects can fund battery storage or energy storage writ large, but batteries, vehicle to grid, pumped hydro. They can support controllers, other electric equipment. And then there is a carve out for replacing old generation components with new generation components of the same type. But I would say that for that eligible expense, you would have to show how this is has a resiliency component. So it couldn't just be replacing a solar array with more solar without a battery attached to it or something like that. Next slide. Yeah, and then finally, just some high-level selection criteria we're looking at. We're looking at greatest community benefit, this project reducing vulnerabilities and increasing resilience, and then a local commitment and readiness. How much has this project been vetted with partners? How much has the entity, put forward planning or other resources towards getting ready to apply for this grant? And you can see more details at our website that is linked below. Great, I'll turn it back over to you, John.
Great, thank you so much, Julia. Yeah, and I should just mention that Julia was off camera today just because slow internet connection. But I'm going to be talking about the grid hardening grants, the advanced grid monitoring grant, and the microgrid roadmap. So here's just an overview of these 3 different programs that we have. As I mentioned, the first one, the grid hardening grant, this is for small and remote communities. And I'll tell you a little bit more what that means in a minute. So a little over $4 million available. There's up to $1 million available per grant. That is the maximum. And then the advanced grid monitoring, there's up to $500,000 available per grant. And in terms of this microgrid roadmap, I know there's a number of folks on the call who have been active participants in that process. We had 2 rounds of stakeholder engagement, one in January and February and one in July. There is a draft posted on our website, which you're welcome to look at, and we are currently reviewing comments from that, and we'll have an updated version, final version, at the end of the year. So this is the first program. I'm sure there's a lot of interest in this, and this is to well, first of all, the eligible entities are small and rural cooperative and municipal utilities. And when we say small, we mean less than 4 million megawatt hours sold last year. So that includes most of the co-ops and munis in the state. I think the one, so it does exclude Colorado Springs, for example, and then and we all are also hoping to really get this out to smaller communities that don't have the opportunity for as much funding as the larger utilities. So there's a whole wide array of possible projects that this could fund: weatherization technologies, fire-resistant technology, fire prevention systems, undergrounding of electrical equipment, utility pole management, relocation of power lines, and reconductoring power lines with low sag, advanced conductors, vegetation and fuel load management, adaptive protection technologies, hardening of the power lines or facilities or substations, and the replacement of old overhead conductors and underground cables. So again, this is $1 million per grant. So since all of the applicants will be small utilities under that 4 million megawatt hour level, there is a 1/3 match requirement. So that if you were to apply, for example, for the maximum grant, $1 million, you would need to put forward $333,333.33 for your, as a minimum, as every 1/3 match. So that would be a $1.33 million total project. So let's see, the applications for this are due on November 1st. And during the winter, we will be reviewing those in December and then letting folks know in December or January. The next project here is the Advanced Grid Monitoring Program. And this is for communication systems that identify or allow a utility to respond to disruptions on the transmission and distribution systems, and technologies that allow real-time monitoring of power flow. Here are some example of projects and fire monitoring technologies and fire prevention systems. So that could be some of the Pano AI cameras, for example, using the interrupters or other devices that detach the grid and will prevent spread of, well, will prevent the electricity from moving through a feeder if necessary, if there is a wildfire in the area or a high fire danger. Advanced vegetation and fuel load management using LiDAR, satellites, AI, or other information technology, as well as drones. This has been a very popular use of this grant during the first round, and I anticipate this use of drones and LiDAR to be popular during this next round as well. Distribution pole sensors, smart meters, grid modeling, and studies to identify where to best strategically locate some of these devices. So this is the maximum is $500,000 for per grant, and so this is available to all utilities of all sizes. So if you are a utility that sold more than 4 million megawatt hours last year, you would be required to provide a 100% cost match. So that includes Xcel Energy, Colorado Springs Utilities. I believe it also includes some of our other wholesale providers like Tri-State and Platte River Power Authority. To my understanding, those are the only 4 utilities that are above that threshold. Everyone else would need to pay the 1/3 local match. And actually, this should be based on 2023 utility sales and not 2022 utility sales. And these cost matches can be cash, they can be in kind, or they can be a combination of the two. So this project is due. I'm sorry, the application is due on November 15th. And and then we will do the review and send it off to DOE. So we have this is our rubric for determining how which projects that we receive, which applications we receive to select and recommend for funding to the Department of Energy. And these are each related to our specific goals, both from IIJA Section 40101D, as well as our state goals in terms of use of this funding. And the first is the demonstrated need. So we are interested in the historic frequency and duration of the power outages, the proportion of the historically underserved populations in the target community or communities. One thing we've encouraged folks to do is use the EnviroScreen tool to really help better understand what those communities, those underserved communities look like in your area, in your service territory, and also the demonstrated financial need of the utilities. So, we're not asking you to open up your books to us, but we are looking for a narrative that will describe, how this project is in need and it's outside of your current budget. That's 40%. And the second area is project impact. So we're looking at the climate risk and the social vulnerability of the target population and how this project will help mitigate those risks and vulnerabilities. And so we will also look at the ability of the project to mitigate risks of power outages to the community. And the labor impact is 10%. So the focus, we want to make sure that there's strong labor standards and protections. If you have any project labor agreements, that's great. Training practices, any plans to partner with a training provider, and any use of other appropriate credentialed workforce. If you've got some sort of apprenticeship program at your utility, I mentioned that. Focus on that in your narrative. And then the last 20% is on project readiness. So we want to know, are you ready to launch this program in terms of your administrative, technical, and operational preparedness? And one thing you will need to do for both of these programs is write a narrative. So there's a number of documents that you will need to complete to submit your application. The most important is the narrative. And I really encourage everyone to make sure you focus on each of these points that's listed here. If you don't, you'll get 0 points for that section, and your application will be considerably less competitive. I just wanted to share some of our awarded projects. Right now, we are currently in the contracting phase for a number of projects. So we have between the two programs, there's 13 different projects. So there are 6 projects from the Grid Hardening program. I'm sorry, 7 projects from the Grid Hardening Program, and 6 projects from the Advanced Grid Monitoring Project program. Currently, we have some. If you look on the projects on the left, these are projects that have been approved by the DOE, and we're currently working through the contracting process between the Colorado Energy Office and the utility. So that includes some reconductoring of lines with Mountain Parks, relay recloser replacement with Empire Electric Association, advanced grid monitoring. We are working on drone line inspection and data collection with Mountain Parks Electric, and then LiDAR and satellite line inspection and data collection with Tri-State Generation and Transmission. You can see the image down there on the bottom. I think that probably more of the drones will be quadcopters instead of single copters there, but you get the idea. And let's see, we also have some other projects that are expected to be approved by the DOE. And we appreciate everyone's patience as we wait for that DOE approval process. But here is just an overview of those. We're looking at vegetation, fuel load management, undergrounding in densely vegetated area, reconductoring, using those advanced conductors, undergrounding and installing fire-resistant technologies, reconductoring, and then with the advanced grid monitoring, we've got wildfire mitigation with Pano, AI cameras and interrupter closers, and distribution grid modeling. I did not identify the potential recipients, the ones on the right, just because they have not been awarded thus far from or approved thus far by DOE. Also, I want to mention here, we have the microgrid roadmap. This is one slide that tries to encompass the whole 126-page document. I encourage folks to go to our website, take a look at it. I think it will be useful for you to get a better understanding of what the uses are of microgrids, different uses of them in Colorado currently, as well as some different pathways that our policymakers and our utilities could use moving forward in terms of the use of microgrids to mitigate outages, or the impacts of outages, I should say, to our communities. One thing that we looked at was to identify the communities that are most likely to be impacted by power outages. And so we looked at multiple overlapping vulnerabilities. So the first is infrastructure vulnerabilities. And this means those areas of the state that are served by one radial line that does not have the benefit of redundant lines that can tap into it and provide power should that main line go out. Climate risk. So these are areas that are increasingly at risk of increasing heat exposure, wildfires, droughts, or floods. And then there's social vulnerabilities. These are communities that might have a higher prevalence of populations of older populations, lower income families and communities, minorities, linguistically isolated communities. And you can see on this map here that the regions that we've identified are mostly along our southern and western borders. There we've got southeastern Colorado, San Luis Valley, southwest Colorado, northwest Colorado, and then some areas in the central mountains. This is some areas that we're focusing on that have these intersections of vulnerabilities, but we are not indicating that there are that these are the only areas that would benefit from microgrids, because in fact in the metro area and throughout the state there are lots of places that would benefit from microgrids. I would encourage you to take a look at our website because there is lots of information on our website, and you have lots of opportunities to look at all the different projects and programs that are on here. And we will be actually updating this website in just a couple of weeks. So it'll have a brand new look. And upon the update of that, we will also have for each of these programs, there will be a folder with ancillary documents that you'll need to complete in order to submit your application. And that includes the environmental questionnaire, the budget document, which is the SF424, and as well as the sub-applicant notification form. If you look in the RFAs, you can see that there's a link to the National Energy NETL. So that's a National Energy Technology Laboratory. That's the subsection of the DOE that is administering these grid resiliency funds. There's a link there to get those, but if you hold tight, in a couple of weeks, I'll post that folder on this website, and then I also have a webinar follow-up to this one to just walk you through filling out those forms, because as we all know, anybody who's completed a federal grant application knows that there's some challenges in there, and not everything is crystal clear. I will pass it back to Julia to talk about some other funding.
Great, thank you, John. Next slide. Awesome. Okay. So we wanted to share this is upcoming funding. It hasn't formally been released yet by FEMA, but two funding sources that go through FEMA and are administered by DHSEM, the state agency. BRIC and FMA are two different opportunities to go after projects that might align with some of the projects you might be thinking of for these three grant opportunities that we have at the state. FEMA can provide up to $50 million of a federal share for a single project under these programs. Some of the requirements, and I guess I'll say on the front end of this, my understanding is that there are a lot of steps that go into before you are able to submit a BRIC grant. And functionally, if you don't have these things in place now, it is likely you will not be able to apply this round. So just keep that in mind. And we have the website that John just threw in the chat for more info, and you can talk to our DHSEM colleagues about it. But just kind of flagging that there is a pretty extensive approach that is needed to be taken. So you have to have a hazard mitigation plan to apply for these programs. It's 25% cost share. And these types of projects are pretty wide ranging and have a lot fewer restrictions than the grants that we've set up. So you can fund generation, new generation, microgrids, batteries, and these projects should have should be contributing to a long-term solution for a specific hazard-related problem. So you could think about that as extreme heat or wildfire risk, things like that. And another key thing is that these microgrid grants or projects would not have to be limited to a critical facility. So there could be a broader application of ways that one could go after these funds. So yeah, just go to that website for more information. If you'd like to be connected to some folks at DHM and you'd like an introduction, feel free to reach out to us and we can set that up for you. Next slide. So this is a very exciting opportunity. So some folks may remember, I believe it was last year, but at the beginning of last year, there was a grant program through DOE called Energy Improvements in Rural and Remote Areas. It's specifically earmarked for communities with 10,000 folks and under. And again, a pretty wide array of things that can be funded. And so it's exciting because it seems as though there will be another round of this funding. There has just been a notice of intent to release the NOFO release. So this is not a formal application window or anything, but it appears that there will be $400 million available for these types of projects. You can see more information at that link there that I have in the slide. And, you know, I would love to, if there are folks on the call who are interested in talking about a project they want to submit or talking about partnering with other communities to go after a larger dollar amount. The state had put together a state-led application for this that made it through the first round of review and was not selected in the second round. And we may be going after that again. That approach has not been decided yet. So if there's any interest in that, would be happy to discuss further. Next slide. And then two more opportunities that are more around technical assistance. So the first one, Colorado is newly a part of this 11-state technical assistance project that DOE is administering, and we are looking for a utility to participate in this process. It's a pretty low utility involvement. We have a one-pager linked in this slide, and maybe John can also throw it in the chat, that kind of outlines the deliverables, but essentially they're using, the consultants will be using all of public data to kind of analyze a service territory. So the utility involvement would be more on the side of kind of talking to the consultant about your resilience goals. And if you wanted to contribute additional data, you could, but the catch is that Colorado can only nominate one utility for this. And so we would love to hear from you. If you're interested, you can email John by September 13th, and his email is in this slide as well. And if you have further questions after you read that one pager, happy to discuss. I mean, the state is also a part of this process. We're not administering this TA, so we're also learning right now, but we'd be happy to take any questions you might have and pass them along to DOE or the consultant to get some more information. So the delivery of that will be a current and future state of the grid report that will have a specific focus on that utility service territory. So it is a pretty cool opportunity if you are interested. Next slide. And then finally, we are still seeking communities that are interested in improving their energy resilience, through the community-informed critical infrastructure and facility prioritization process. So this would include a region, a county, a utility service territory, partnering with a locality and some other stakeholders, and DOLA and CEO will facilitate a process where we'll help you guys assess what your critical infrastructure and critical facilities are, and assign a prioritization that would then feed into, if you were interested in going after funding, prioritizing existing funding for projects. This would help kind of orient the goals a little bit towards a more strategic effort. So that deadline is September 6th, which is next Friday. And we have a brief survey that you would need to fill out. And in that survey, you would need to, assign a point person from probably the locality, and then you would also want the utility to be on board. So it would have to be a collaborative process, or an emergency manager, or someone in that sort of realm. So again, if you have questions, you can reach out to us, but please fill out that survey if you're interested. We would love to partner with your community. Next slide. Great. So that is all we have. I did want to comment on the question from Rick in the chat that I did answer, but Rick asked, just to clarify if there is any funding for generation available through the MCR grant. And unfortunately, the answer is no. That is a restriction for the federal funding we have. So while this federal funding is great, there are some eligible expenses and some things that are restricted, and new generation is one of them. So we can, I highlighted some other opportunities that you guys could go after for funding that could go towards generation. And we have some other state funds that we would happily share with you, like the energy impact and mineral grant funding through DOLA with the Climate Resilience Challenge set aside. That could be a good opportunity. But yes, we're aware that this is a gap, and we are doing our best to kind of help entities figure out creative solutions to getting funding for that portion of a microgrid. So I will stop talking, and I see there are lots of questions in the chat. So John, maybe you want to take one of those.
Sure, yes. Let's see. I see that Yvonne Morfit, I believe from the town of Center, is asking a question about, can we call you and talk over our project with you to see what is best? Yes, that's definitely appropriate. I'm dropping, there's my email address. You can use Grid Resiliency. It's state.co.us. And that's in addition, that's kind of a specific email that I'm using for these grants. And then there's also my John M. Parks at state.co.us. Feel free to reach out to me, and be happy to set up an appointment to talk about that. Okay. Oh, sorry.
I can take the question from Will. So, okay, for DOLA construction, storage, and controller, would it be possible to fund a controller that is being installed as part of a new microgrid that includes new generation system? So the short answer is yes. However, the generation system would not be an eligible match expense. So we would really have to separate the budget and keep those two. I mean, obviously they wouldn't go in the same budget, even though they're part of a new project together. So Will, we can talk, but it would just have to kind of be separate from what you are getting funding from us for. So if the matching requirement is not going to be able to be met without identifying that generation piece in the mix, then that would not work. But if you guys have cash or other assets that you want to put towards match in kind, that definitely will work. So we can talk more specifically if you want to.
Okay, great. Are there other questions that we can help answer about any of these programs at this point? Anybody would like to put a question in the chat, or we can invite you to speak? Let us know. Okay.
Would backup generators qualify? So not for the microgrid grant program, and not for John's programs as well. So no.
Yeah, and appreciate that question there. We're really seeing microgrids as kind of backup generator 2.0 opportunity, and so that's it. That is an opportunity there. Although the generation, as Julia mentioned, is not applicable use of this. There's two things that you can't use this funding for that relates to grid resiliency. One is generation, and two is cybersecurity. Obviously, you're going to need both of those components to make your system work, but you just can't pay for them with these grants. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and stop our recording.